Do I have something in my teeth? Hello, this is Emma from Beanbag Books, and sadly I don't have my nice white room at my parents' house to film it anymore, so we're back to the finding myriad ways to film around the fact that my bedroom is roughly the size of a broom closet. Tell me if you like this draping a scarf over my lofted bed so it doesn't look like I live in a prison. I have a lot of scarves, I really like scarves, and it's summertime, so I don't get to wear them, so the least I could do is show them to people in other ways, right? This is a super late May book wrap-up. I'm really sorry it's so late. I kept getting caught up in other things to make videos about, and I had a lot of traveling. I started an internship over the summer, so I've had trouble figuring out when to film, but I will finally tell you the books I read for Asian Readathon, the other books that I am going to read, in the books that I am planning. No. Why do I need to do this so many times? I'll finally tell you all the books I read for Asian Readathon and then the other non-Asian Readathon books I read during the month of May, and I'm also going to announce a little project that I'm working on that I'm going to be talking about in a few weeks. I read 10 books in the month of May. Like, I kind of don't know how I did that, but there are 10 books on this list, and I have information about them inside of my head, so I think it happened somehow. But I'm not going to talk about 2 of them, and here's why. So the project I'm working on is I am currently reading all of the shortlist for the Women's Prize this year, and once I read all of those books, I am going to finish by the end of June. I'll do a video talking about all of them, what I think of them, I'm going to rank them, and then I'm going to guess which one I think is going to win the prize. Then I'll look up to see which one actually does win. The winner will be announced, I think, on July 7th, so it'll be a little while before I get this done. And I'm currently on book number 5 of 6 and just have one more after that, and then I'll have read all of them. I'm not going to tell you which 2 books I finished in May until I do the wrap-up for the Women's Prize, but if you really want to know, you should follow me on Goodreads because I already posted reviews of them. Anyway, so now that that shameless plug is over with, I'll get to the books that I read for Asian Readathon this past month. I managed to read 4 Asian books for Asian Readathon in the month of May. I really would have liked to read 5, but I could not get The God of Small Things at my library because the same person had it for a really long time. I finished it now. I'm going to talk about it eventually, but I didn't finish it in May, so I can't talk about it for Asian Readathon, sadly. The first book I finished for Asian Readathon was 3 Daughters of Eve by Elif Shafak, and I'm really mad at myself because I don't have a copy of that book with me. It's at my house, so I'm gonna have to edit in a copy next to me. Hope I remember to do that. This book, as you'll know if you watched my Asian Readathon TBR video, is about a young woman named Peri who grew up on the Asian side of Istanbul in Turkey in a Muslim household. And as she studies at Oxford and begins to learn more about faith and questions of religion with a class with a charismatic and somewhat rakish professor, she starts to question where she fits into this whole dichotomy of religion versus atheism. Her dad is a pretty confirmed atheist, her mom is very religious, and she doesn't quite know where she fits. She sees points of both sides. She also lives at college with 2 girls, one of whom is also Muslim and is quite religious and devout, and the other of whom is a lapsed Muslim who really isn't religious at all. To be honest, I wasn't sure how I would feel about this book for like 150 pages out of like a 400-page book. There are 2 timelines going on. There's one in the present, which is Istanbul 2016. Peri is married and has children, and she's headed to a dinner party with some of her husband's friends that she doesn't super want to go to, but like it's fine. And she's remembering these traumatic events from her past, from when she was a child and also when she attended Oxford, that have shaped her and who she is today. And so that hops back and forth. All of the past events are chronological, but we keep returning to the modern 2016 timeline. And that timeline honestly wasn't super compelling to me until almost the end of the book. It was very standard, like, wealthy people having conversations about things that poor people can't afford to care about because they're worried about surviving. And that was pretty much all it had going for it until kind of late in the book, but it got really interesting late in the book, so I think it was still worth it to have it in there. One other thing I sort of wished that we could see more of in this book was, it's called 3 Daughters of Eve, right? So we expect to see three daughters of Eve in almost equal capacity, but the book is almost entirely about Perry. Her two friends are present for a lot of the book, but they just aren't as important as I wanted them to be given the title. And I wish that they had more, and I would have liked to explore their characters more, because I feel like a lot of it was just the dichotomy of their opposites. Like, one's religious, one's not, and one follows the rules and one is promiscuous, and it just didn't seem like, they didn't seem like, I wanted them to come off the page a little bit more rather than be these symbols for like Perry to bounce off of and be in the middle of all the time. However, other than that, I was really interested in the way that this book explores faith questions. I think it handles it in a very nuanced way. You see lots of different relationships to faith throughout the book. Each student in Perry's religion class has a different relationship to religion and faith, and so even just with those little snippets, you get to learn a lot about different backgrounds. I also thought the book did a good job of tackling those questions without overwhelming the actual story. The story is founded around this religion class that Perry takes, especially in the later chapters, but it doesn't feel like we're being handed a syllabus and being forced to like read these dense texts when we signed up for a novel. It's very well integrated into the story. The two best characters by far are Perry and Professor Azur, who is her professor. The more I learned about him, just the more interesting he became. He's often a very difficult character to really like or sympathize with, but then again, Perry can be as well, and I am all aboard the characters don't have to be likable train. I am very interested in unlikable characters sometimes. I really like books where faith questions are explored in a meaningful way and taken seriously rather than outright dismissed as a fairy tale or something for people who are afraid of progress or science. I would highly recommend this book for that reason. I did have a few problems with it. I would give it 3.5 out of 5 stars, but it's a very strong 3.5. It was almost 4. Next book I read was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This book was so quick that you almost miss it. It's like, I think it's like 117 pages or something. This is set in a world that's similar to Imperial China. It's never mentioned, I think, as being that, but it's very similar to that culture. It follows a non-binary cleric named Chi, and they are listening to an older woman named Rabbit tell her stories of living in the court of the Empress and how she eventually became the Empress's friend, even though a lot of people didn't like her. She was from the north and she was not trusted or treated well at the beginning because of that. In some ways, having a frame story and then a story within that is a little bit difficult for a novella that's this short, and although I thought the writing style was really beautiful and evocative without being too flowery, I thought that the characters were interesting. I thought that the Empress was pretty well drawn and a complex character despite the page length. I really wished that the book were just a little bit longer so that we could have some more time with these two stories and also get to know maybe Chi a little bit better. So I'm giving it 3 stars because I liked what was there. I just wanted more of what was there, which seems to be my complaint with a lot of novellas. So perhaps this isn't fair of me to just rate novellas lower because of their form, but honestly, that is how I feel about most novellas. I'm not too enthused about them because there's just not a lot of space. However, I did think that this particular novella is worth reading. I'm really excited to read the next book in the series, which will be a different adventure that she has. So I'm excited for more of that, ultimately. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize the fan was as loud as it was until I went to turn it off. Right now I'm in an apartment that doesn't have air conditioning, and since it's the time of year when you need it, we have fans going all the time, so I'm going to turn off the fan for the duration of the video so you can hear me a little bit better. I apologize again. Next book I read for Asian Readathon was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This book has like a 4.74 star average rating on Goodreads. And to be quite honest, I don't even know why I'm talking about it because everything everyone has said about it is true. It's beautifully written, it's raw, it's meticulously crafted, and it's also a really revealing true story of the woman who was raped by Brock Turner in, I think, 2016, several years back, and what it was like to be the victim of a rape trial in one that was like so heavily publicized and that people all over the country and all over the world were aware of while still like trying to protect your own life and your own privacy. But this is more than just like the story of that small moment in Chanel Miller's life. She also writes about her childhood, her parents, the sister that she was with that night and what her sister is like, her boyfriend who helped her through everything, her grandmother who came and sat at the back of the courtroom every single day to support her granddaughter, and all of the people that she met along the way who said that they were inspired by her and who she felt inspired by in turn. Because in the end, this book isn't just good because it tells an important and powerful story. It's good because Chanel Miller can write. And I think it's important to make sure everyone knows what a strong and beautiful writer Chanel Miller is, because I feel like just reducing this book to a quote-unquote important story doesn't do it justice, because it just is so wonderfully written. I highlighted like a ton of quotes on Goodreads, so I don't think I have time to list out all of them. But here's one that I can share. Writing is the way I process the world. When I was given the opportunity to write this book, whatever God is up there said, "You got your dream." I said, actually, I was hoping for a lighter topic, and God was like, haha, you thought you got to choose. This was the topic I was given. If something else had happened to me, I would have written about that too. Almost all of the people that she mentions in this book feel so concretely real to me that I almost feel like I could recognize them. Even down to the people who are in it the least, like the doorman in her boyfriend's building who knew that she liked this particular kind of hot chocolate and would always make sure it was there when she went downstairs when she was unemployed and in the apartment all the time. I just want to find him and shake his hand and thank him for that. The district attorney who fought so hard for her, the two Swedish guys who beat up Brock Turner for what he did to her, and the love and gratitude that she felt for them for standing up when they could have just ridden by. She also does a really good job of balancing telling her own story and also connecting it to the larger issues within the US justice system and how it fails a lot of young women. She also made a little bit of a connection to police brutality and the victims of that and how the justice system fails them. And she also did that nicely, I thought. She didn't make it about herself. She didn't say, oh, I'm the same as victims of police brutality because I know what this is like, but she made the case that both in rape cases and with police brutality that the justice system really is not helping victims of those crimes. There's also a section I really liked about how she did stand-up comedy to help cope with the trauma of her assault, and she tells us right away that she's a very quiet person, very shy, was never the person to raise her hand in class, and here she is doing stand-up comedy and she's actually pretty good at it, and people really loved listening to her perform, and it was something like she'd never done. And it wasn't like she could fix her problems with that, and it also wasn't like she could fix the criminal justice system with that, but it was just something that helped her cope, and I liked that peek into her personality and her manner of reclaiming her autonomy in that way. Also, if you weren't aware, Chanel Miller is half Chinese. That's why this book qualifies for Asian Readathon. And she also talks about growing up half Chinese and her mom, who is an acclaimed writer in China, but is a second language learner of English, and how people didn't always recognize the brain power that was behind this like unintimidating woman who had to like look up how to pronounce common English words constantly during Chanel Miller's childhood. Yeah, of course, a 5 out of 5 stars, 5,000% worth your time. What are you still doing here? Go read it. Last Asian Readathon book that I read was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. This was another novella, just sort of a fun buddy comedy fantasy, also set in an imperial China-like atmosphere. This book, however, was quite different, I thought, from The Empress of Salt and Fortune. It really is reminiscent to me of kind of a buddy comedy. It's a bunch of guys who happen to steal stuff for a living. Genteel thieves, perhaps. And what happens when a young woman who was formerly a member of the Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water decides to join up. I like the philosophy in this book, and I also like the interesting takes on gender and gender roles. There's some really good LGBTQ rep that kind of sneaks up on you, but I think it's really well done. I think the setting is well developed given the space, and it's a lot of fun to read. I don't know that it will necessarily stick with me that long because similarly to The Empress of Salt and Fortune, it's just so small and short, and there's a lot trying to be like packed in. The ending also to me wasn't super satisfying. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but overall I would give this 3 stars. I think it's a lot of fun. Now let's move on to the books I read that were not part of Asian Readathon. I read 4 other books besides the 2 secret ones that I will not reveal to you just yet. The first of these was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which I read for one of my book clubs. I had been a fan of Trevor Noah's brand of comedy for a while. I really like how he integrates current events and comedy and does so in a way that's fun and enjoyable to listen to, but isn't mean-spirited necessarily. And also how he talks to a lot of different people with different viewpoints. This particular book is kind of a series of essays / stories about Trevor Noah's life as a child in South Africa. He was half black and half white. His father was white and Swedish, and his mother was South African and black, and at that time, intermarriage between black and white people was not allowed. So he spent a lot of time inside as his mom tried to hide him from people who might take him away from her. The stories are written very similarly to how Trevor Noah talks on his show, so if you like his brand of comedy on his show, you will probably enjoy these stories. He talks about a lot of different aspects of life in South Africa. Some of it is what it was like to go to school and have people be really confused because you didn't look like you were either black or white, but you also spoke languages commonly spoken by both black and white people. So that was really confusing for a lot of Trevor's fellow students. Also some of the trouble he got into as a kid, which was quite a lot. At one point, he actually burned down a house. He and his mother had to jump out of a moving car. He pirated CDs to make money. But also this is a book about his mom, the woman who raised him. And she's just like a really great badass lady, just tough and doesn't take shit from anybody, but also really kind and giving and generous. So she's a really important part of this book as well. Occasionally there was some overlap between the stories that didn't need to be there. They restated information that was already in a different story, so that was a little redundant. Also occasionally I could tell that he was trying to be funny and some of the comedy just fell flat. Especially at points in the story, there were a couple that reflected badly on other people who I think might have been innocent in the situation, or kind of used other people to tell a story about Trevor when I thought that maybe hearing a different side of the story might change perspective a little bit. But overall, I enjoyed this collection, and I also liked the little snippets of South African history that are interspersed between every chapter. I know some people have criticized this book because they call it like apartheid for dummies, not really going into super in-depth information, but I am a dummy about apartheid because I really just didn't know much about it, so for me this book was very suitable. You can tell it's written for people probably in the US who don't really know much about apartheid, and I think that that's fine as long as you know that going into it. So I would give this, I think, 3.5 stars. Okay, this is one that I was not looking forward to talking about because I don't have much good to say about it, and that is Big Summer by Jennifer Weiner? I think it's Weiner. Jennifer Weiner. This was another book for my book club. It is a story of a plus-size Instagram influencer named Daphne who was humiliated by the person she thought was her best friend when she was about 19. This friend, Drew, was like the super popular, super cool, really rich girl at her school that everybody wanted to be around. But she had this habit of making people feel bad about themselves, which, I mean, if you've seen even half an episode of Pretty Little Liars, you know how that is. But when Daphne and Drew are both like in their mid-20s, Drew suddenly appears back in Daphne's life and wants her to not only attend her wedding, but be her maid of honor. Daphne kind of feels bad for Drew because she doesn't seem to have a lot of real friends anymore that she can ask, so she concedes to this and then gets caught up in this intense mystery involving family drama, unsolved crime, lots of other weird stuff that she then takes it upon herself and her friends to solve. And if that sounds like too much, it's because it is, in fact, too much. This book feels like it's supposed to be, I don't know, maybe a manifesto about being plus size in a world that wants you to be thin and what kind of challenges might come with that and how to overcome those, but there really isn't as much of that in the book as I would like. It's all balanced in like the first half, and then in the second half it just disappears and goes right to the mystery. And so we don't really get a satisfying growth arc from Daphne in that sense because it's undermined by this like random crazy mystery thing. There's also tons of family drama, best friend drama, insta-love, unsolved crimes, illegitimate children. There's just everything in here. My head, honestly, like by probably 70% of the way through, felt like it was going to explode. Most of the characters, except for Daphne, I think are pretty stereotypical and flat, and I think a lot of them are just there for, it seems like, either diversity points or just because some role needed to be filled. Like there needed to be a romance because this is a chick lit novel. There needed to be a best friend, so oh, let's make her Asian and bisexual. But neither of those is fully explored in this book. And so we don't get as much about what it's like to be that best friend as I think I might have liked. Also, it kind of sucks to me that Daphne is so concerned throughout the entire book of how she's perceived based on her weight. But in several places, she judges people, especially other women, for not being super pretty or for looking a certain way. And I'm just like, girl, like, have you learned nothing? The resolution of the mystery is also totally ridiculous. And by the time we even got there, I almost didn't care because I was so fed up with most of the characters. And then the overwrought, over-the-top resolution just made me less interested, honestly. This book was occasionally interesting in sort of a soap opera train wreck kind of way, so I don't know, I guess it's 2 stars. Maybe 1.5. I'm feeling generous, too. I listened to the audiobook version of this book, and it was read by Danielle Macdonald, who you might know from her starring role in the Netflix movie Dumplin', which was one of my favorite movies of the last couple of years. And I was excited to pick it up because I knew that she was narrating, but unfortunately even she could not save this book. I stopped listening to the audiobook about 80% of the way through and just decided to read an ebook copy because I wanted to finish it for my book club, but I also didn't think I could take an hour more of it. Now that we got that unpleasantness out of the way, let's move on to the last 2 books, which are both pretty good. Solutions and Other Problems by Allie Brosh was the next book I read. She wrote a book called Hyperbole and a Half a few years ago, which got a lot of press for its honest discussion of mental health and also its very quirky minimalist art style. All of the people are like sort of stick figures with like triangle-ish bodies and weird hair, and it's sort of my kind of art because I am not a very good. I appreciate the art style a lot because even though it's so simple, it can convey a lot. I knew about Hyperbole and a Half. I had never read it. I read this book because I got it for Christmas. And I was really shocked in a good way by the subject matter that she tackles in this book and how she manages to balance it with comedy. The beginning of the book just has some sort of lighthearted, oh, look how hard it is to be a person anecdotes. So one minute you're reading about Allie interacting with her 5-year-old neighbor, or like her childhood self determined to fit inside of a bucket for no apparent reason, and you're like, okay, I mean, this is cute, but do you have anything else? And then all of a sudden you're reading, on New Year's Eve, my little sister drove her car in front of a train. She died instantly. Oh my god. And one of the overarching themes of this book to me is that life is just weird like that. Traumatic and tragic events are often surrounded by comedy and general weirdness. It's kind of like eating a meal and not wanting the different foods to touch, but you kind of know that they will anyway, and you get the sad and the silly and the funny and the tragic just all mixed together. Not a whole lot has worked out for anybody this year, including Allie Brosh. She talks about her difficulties with her physical and mental health and her marriage falling apart, the death of her sister, which all happened to her in the last couple of years. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially now, just because a lot of people had a lot of stuff not work out for them. I know not everything that I wanted to work out for me did. It's kind of nice when that happens to read a book by somebody who knows that life isn't always going to work out and can't really tell you that it's definitely all going to be okay, but at least can be there with you and agree that it really sucks. So thank you, Allie Brosh, for that. This book was 4 stars. It's good. You should read it. The last book was one that I read when I was on vacation in Texas. It's called Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. It's a YA style novel, but it's handled very maturely in a way that YA sometimes isn't. It's about a young woman named Cassiopeia, and she is a teenager in 1920s Mexico. She lives with her mother's family, and they look down upon her because her father had indigenous heritage rather than Spanish heritage. She dreams of escaping and going to the nearby city of Mérida, which actually is a city where I studied for a few weeks in college. So I knew a lot of the places that she was referencing. I could picture the square in Merida when she talked about it, and it was really cool. She realizes that her grandfather has been keeping the bones of a god captive in a trunk in his house, and she accidentally releases that god, and she gets a bit of his bone stuck in her finger, so he's actually feeding off of her life force. His name is Hunkame, and his brother is attempting to take over his underworld domain. So he and Cassiopeia go on a journey across Mexico in order to gather bits of his body that have been distributed among other godly figures and try to stop the brother from taking over. If you think this sounds a little bit like Rick Riordan, you are probably right. There is a lot of the aspect of questing and finding the different things that are needed to defeat this specific evil figure. The book is also kind of a travelogue for Mexico in the way that Rick Riordan's books are often a travelogue of different parts of the United States. I've only been to that small part of Mexico that I mentioned, so I liked being able to see into places like Mexico City, El Paso, I know that's in Texas, but it's like right there, and other locations as well. Cassiopeia is a really sympathetic heroine. She is strong and brave, while still seeming like a character outside of those two characteristics, rather than somebody who's just a pure badass and underneath them is just more badassery instead of, I don't know, like feelings or desires. She and Hunkame do strike up a kind of romance, but I think it's very differently handled than it would be in a lot of other YA. It's very clear from the beginning that Cassiopeia is a human girl and Hunkame is a god, and so there are difficulties that come with that. And so that was handled, I think, very maturely in comparison to some other YA that I've encountered. Also, the relationship between Cassiopeia and her cousin Miguel is very interesting. Miguel is just this guy who is supposed to have everything and be the heir to his grandfather's estate, and he always is being shown up by how smart and resourceful Cassiopeia is, and so he begins to resent her for that reason. So he's weak and easily manipulated, but he's not necessarily an evil person, and I thought that that relationship was very interesting too. The writing is often very beautiful, and there's a lot of descriptions of Mexican indigenous mythology and the underworld that were really cool to read, and if you don't know much about that, then I'm sure that you'll find that very unique and cool. This book was a lot of fun to read, but it felt like it had a really strong cultural core and also a strong core of morals and doing the right thing without being preachy, and so I really enjoyed it for that. 4 stars. There you have it. That's all the books I'm going to talk to you about, because the others will be featured in a later vlog. Thank you for sticking with me this long. If you just skipped to the end because you wanted to make it look like you viewed the whole video, thank you anyway, because that makes it look like I have more views, so I'm definitely happy about that. In any case, thank you, and I will see you next time, or at the very least, you'll see me. Bye.